Schools also suffered fire damage. KwaZulu-Natal Education Department says that at least 20 have been damaged since the beginning of the unrest in the country. Education unions, including the National Professional Teachers Organization, has condemned the incidents. To take us further with this discussion, we're now joined via Zoom by NAPTOSA's Executive Director, Basil Manuel. Thank you, sir, for waiting for us. We certainly were going to talk to you earlier, but the Minister had some words there in Phoenix. So thanks indeed for your patience and thanks for joining us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Flo. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, of course, I've heard education activists having raised, and rightly so, their rage and in fact the word disgust was used at the fact that 32 schools have been looted in KZ. And it seems that this is something that was slightly underreported, and I understand in terms of the fact that there was so much else happening. There were murders happening, there was looting happening, there was unrest happening, and it seems that not much attention was really focused on the issue of schools that in fact were also in fact bore the brunt of what happened. What's your reaction to all that's happened? And maybe you can paint a picture for us really of the extent of this damage, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal.
Thanks, Flo. NAPTOSA is extremely concerned, and you are so right. It's been underreported. And we know that schools are soft targets because they don't have adequate security. And of course, we can't really expect that police would focus on the schools only and neglect all the other things. But that makes it even more of a soft target. We have knowledge now of almost 40 schools that have been damaged in some way or the other. Fortunately, the number of schools that have been burnt completely are fewer than initially thought, but the damage has been great. We have special schools that have lost transport. We have schools that are dependent on the feeding scheme that feed hundreds of children, where all that those feeding scheme utensils have been stolen. Yeah. We've seen ablution facilities just simply vandalized and damaged. Now, we know that the vandalism of schools is not owing to only this period. However, it has been heightened. And the reports we have are only from 2 districts. There are still 2 other districts also within the red zone, so to speak, that haven't reported on it. And that makes us even more concerned. Given the spectre of learners returning to school shortly, of course, dependent on all the other factors, we are worried about the impact on learners, the impact on teachers. And of course, it's not only the physical issue of not having the space, having lost things, but also the mental impact. Children have been traumatized throughout the province. And to come to school, the one place that is for many, many learners a safe haven, and be faced with the same burnt out sections, destroyed sections, classrooms vandalized, etc. NAPTOSA has called it akin to treason. Yeah. We are saying we are robbing children of a future, robbing a generation of comfortable schooling. And we know we can't replace these things overnight, especially in a country where we're already battling to stay ahead with the renewal and building of schools. We are doing a disservice to a generation. And that is why we've called on communities to also look out for schools and their safety, and police, as well as, of course, calling on the department to rethink the strategy of security at schools, particularly in areas that are always vulnerable, not only now, but going on into the future.
Yeah. You know, we'd obviously hope that sometime soon that children would be able, learners would be able to go back to school comfortably. I mean, we're also dealing with the fact that we're right in the middle of a pandemic, which already affected schooling and affected how schools operate. Let's talk about what impact this will then have on the education system with the fact that we have the issue of schools being destroyed. I mean, interestingly, you talk about ablution facilities, which is so important. We've spoken about ablution facilities, which are of paramount importance at this time, given the fact that, you know, children have to wash their hands, learners have to wash their hands, for example, have to adhere to the new normal, I suppose, of COVID-19 regulations. So this directly impacts how schools operate. And perhaps if we can talk to that, Mr. Manuel.
Flo, absolutely. And that is the kernel of our concern. We are worried that we are planning, and there's a lot of plans in place for schools to reopen. We know that it's contingent on many things. However, if in a particular area so much has been destroyed, the chances that some of those schools will be ready to open becomes less and less likely. And of course, when you think about ablution facilities, and you've already mentioned the health factors, the washing of hands, etc., and we have a problem with ensuring that all these non-pharmaceutical measures are there in schools to keep schools safe. And those are the things that have been the most affected. So our learners have lost a lot. Our teachers are absolutely worried about the situation. And that is why we supported the return of our primary schools in full number to school, provided it's safe. But these are factors that start detracting from that, and we can ill afford that. Every single parent wants their child at school. Every single teacher is ready for this. We've done so much work, and now we have the setback. I want to commend the Department of Education, KZN, and for the work that they're doing and trying to mop up, etc. But we know what a mountain that is to climb. And we also know how resources are stretched thinly. However, we cannot have children in an unsafe environment. We cannot have our teachers, our members, in unsafe environments. And that is why we are now pushing ahead and pressurizing for a lot more attention on these schools where damage has happened.
You talk about the Department of Education, and I wonder if you've had, any consultations, particularly in KZN that you mentioned, with perhaps whether it is the MEC for Education in KZN, in terms of assistance that's needed for the schools that are devastated following this unrest and obvious devastation at this time. I mean, what are you hearing from them? I hear you commending the government in KZN. But let's talk about what kind of consultations you might indeed then be having with the government of KZN.
We are this afternoon at 5 o'clock talking to the National Director General, who's also been in touch there. And this is one of the issues that is on our agenda, is the impact that the violence is going to have on the reopening of schools in certain areas, given that all other things may be in place. And then, of course, our local chapter down in KZN has been in touch, and they've been briefed regularly about the situation when that was possible. And in fact, the fact that we know about the damage is about the department having shared the information. It is not information which we could have gathered on our own. And of course, reacting also to the plight of principals, to the plight of schools, because we know schools have been targeted for ridiculous things. Schools don't have much. The equipment, etc., is sometimes not of use to anybody.
Yeah.
But when you acquire a photocopier in a particular school, it's a huge issue because they don't have other duplicating facilities.
Yeah.
And these are the things that have gone missing, that have been destroyed. Food items for the feeding scheme, that means that can't operate. And of course, cooking utensils, etc. So it's a huge problem. But we are in consultation with the department, as I said, later today. And of course, our province is also busy talking to the provincial MEC to ensure that we have a clear understanding. We know there are stationary issues. We know there's all sorts of things that have gone missing or have been destroyed. And we are talking around those too.
All right, Mr. Manuel, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you indeed for always giving us your time.
Thank you, Flo. Pleasure.
All right, that's Basil Manuel, NAPTOSA's Executive Director. We continue on our discussion on the destruction of schools during unrest, particularly those schools in KZN. Save the Children is calling on all parties involved in the violence in South Africa to immediately cease damaging and destroying schools so that children can return to school once the COVID-19 lockdown is over. At least 30 schools